Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. This one is episode 154. The show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/154. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane. And before we get into today's topic, this is the first solo episode I've done in quite some time, so I'm a little excited about that. But I have found myself with a bunch of time on my hands, and I've been rapid firing interviews off. So I have like 5 or 6 episodes, maybe 7 episodes in the can, just kind of waiting. So Patreon supporters already have complete and total access to those episodes. If you want to support this work, go to libertyweekly.net/support. You can find all the links and resources there. So without further ado, I wanted to jump right into today's topic, and I felt kind of moved to make this video because I've seen a lot of people that I respect greatly, and I want to start this out by saying I have tremendous respect for the people that I'm going to be pushing back against in this episode, and mainly that is Luke Rudkowski and Tim Pool. And Luke Rudkowski I've followed for years. I have an immense amount of support or respect and support for him. He's a wonderful ANCAP, and he's done wonderful confrontation videos with, large figures, large insidious figures, and I have tremendous respect for him. I think that him being on Tim Pool's IRL podcast every night is the best development of the pandemic by far, and I'm glad that we have an ANCAP in a show that is getting hundreds of thousands of views every night, and that people are being exposed to these ideas. I also have tremendous respect for what Tim Pool does and how he pushes against corporate narratives. He exposes the lies and manipulation that the media tries to pull over our heads. And I think that, I disagree with him on economic issues, as I'm sure that Luke Rudkowski would. But it concerns me, this anti-China rhetoric. And while at the same time, as a libertarian, of course, we like to promote ideas of liberty. Everyone has inherent natural rights, whether you think they come from God or they come from a priori reasoning. Our creator, if you will, everyone has those rights. And of course, I oppose any kind of regime that is committing horrible atrocities. But we know from history, we know that foreign interventionism does not make things better. That doesn't mean that we can't advocate for certain rights of people abroad, but we know that the war in Afghanistan was a disaster. Our intervention in Vietnam was a disaster. The war in Korea did not pan out. Would have been better if we had stayed out of it. So we have history after history of horrible wars, these interventionism, planned conflict. World War I was a conspiracy. I would point everyone to James Corbett's World War I conspiracy. And I'm going to be talking about World War I and the lies that led to World War I, told mainly by the British government. But I think that when we are talking about a situation like this, we have to be incredibly, incredibly careful about the facts and examining them with a level head, not getting emotional, because we know in the past that when the elites or the powers that shouldn't be, when they want to drum up conflict, they will lie us into it, and there will be misinformation. This war is the most lied about thing in the history of mankind. And so when we're talking about China and we're talking about the Uyghur concentration camps, if you will, I say that in quotations, we need to be very careful at the intelligence that we're getting, and we need to approach these ideas with the level head. And I hate to say it, we know that intervening with the force of the U.S. government and starting any kind of a hot war is going to be something that will, and I'm not saying that Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski are advocating for a hot war. I don't believe they are. However, some people do, and people will use this anti-China rhetoric and this anti-China fear-mongering, I think, to try to propagate some kind of a conflict or policies towards China that will lead to an armed conflict. And I'm going to be going and examining their actual points in this episode. I don't want to make it too long. There's a 16-minute clip from February 18th that was let's see, no, it was February 17th when the IRL, it was the night of February 17th, the IRL podcast with Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski. They were discussing China and Joe Biden's remarks at a Milwaukee CNN town hall, where basically Biden, we know Biden's connections to China through Hunter Biden's scandal. We know those emails were verified. They were confirmed by people that received those emails. And we had Tony Bobulinski, the whistleblower that basically came forward and said, this money's being held by Hunter Biden for the big guy. And so we know that there's corruption. We know that Biden is beholden to China. We do know that China has been influencing U.S. politics. So I'm not coming to this completely naive. And, much, if you want to make a comparison to McCarthyism, I have ties myself to the John Birch Society. My grandfather he was a paleoconservative anti-war, on the right, maybe like more of a Pat Buchanan type. But, I'm not going to sit here and be naive enough to think that China is not, meddling in certain ways or trying to extend their influence. But I think we just have to be very careful about the rhetoric that we use to drum up these situations and to drum up support against China or animosity towards China. Because even if people like Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski have they have anti-war intentions. Tim and Luke both are anti-war. I know this to be true. However, their rhetoric that they are talking is very dangerous, and it can be co-opted. Public opinion can be co-opted, and the powers that shouldn't be can use this public opinion to drum up a real conflict. If China were to invade Taiwan, actually, let's jump right into the article here to support what I'm saying. Here's an article from antiwar.com for those of you who are only listening to the audio version of this. This is written by Dave DeCamp, contributor to antiwar.com. And I had a Twitter exchange with him last night that kind of prompted me to make this episode in a bit. So the article is entitled, Tom Cotton Wants a Chinese Invasion of Taiwan to Mean War with U.S. U.S. currently maintains a strategic ambiguity toward policy on Taiwan. Cotton wants it to be, quote, crystal clear that if China invades, the U.S. will intervene. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, on Thursday called for a new U.S. policy on what would happen in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Currently, the U.S. arms Taiwan through weapons sales and maintains a policy known as, quote, strategic ambiguity, which means the U.S. is not guaranteed to intervene if Beijing moves to take the island. However, Cotton said he wants to make it crystal clear that a Chinese incursion on Taiwan means war with the U.S. Quote, the United States needs to be clear that we will not allow China to invade Taiwan and subjugate it. Case closed. No further debate, he said at a Reagan Institute event. Quote, replace strategic ambiguity with strategic clarity that the United States will come to the aid of Taiwan if China was to forcefully invade Taiwan or otherwise change the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, Cotton added. The hawkish senator said the U.S. should establish, quote, red lines for China that would, quote, require response from Washington. Examples of Cotton's red lines include China seizing Taiwanese claimed islands, a Chinese invasion of a regional ally like India, or if Beijing permits an attack on U.S. troops or allies by North Korea. Cotton made the comments while he presented his plan to take on Beijing economically. In the plan, Cotton called for an economic decoupling from China. Quote, our economy has become far too entangled with China's, providing the Chinese Communist Party with leverage over the U.S. government and industry. It's past time we decoupled from China, he said. Cotton's report came after the U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a study that said the U.S. GDP would see a one-time loss as much as $500 billion if the U.S. companies halved foreign direct investment in China. I had to. Besides the hit to the U.S.'s GDP, decoupling with China... Besides the hit to the U.S.'s GDP, decoupling with China would give Washington and Beijing less reason not to go to war if a naval incident happens in the South China Sea, where the U.S. has stepped up its military presence and frequently sails warships. So I'll put a link to this news article in the show notes page. This is antiwar.com. Again, Dave DeCamp writing for antiwar.com. So, as much as I would... in theory, support self-determination of the Taiwanese people. I don't believe that it is in the U.S.'s best interest to intervene, and if China were to invade Taiwan, they're across the world. We know what intervention is. On some level, it's different if Taiwan says, invites us into their country to help them fight China. However, even that being said, it's not something that I think that American troops, American men and women, 18, children should go and fight and die across the world. Maybe it would be different if China was invading, just for instance, an island off the coast of California or something like that. Or if China was invading Mexico and Mexico asked for us to come in and assist them to repel the Chinese invasion. Maybe that would be different. Maybe if actual U.S. citizens were at risk. So we know that the point of this article, we know that there are war hawks that are pushing war with China. That being said, this rhetoric from Tim Pool and the IRL podcast, well, again, with the caveat that I know that Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski are anti-war individuals, I respectfully push back. So let's dive into that video.
Let's jump into the first story. We have this from the New York Post. Biden dismisses Uyghur internment camps because we have to keep the language family friendly.
We can't even say that word?
No, we can't.
Oh, goodness.
You can't say it.
I'm writing it in my journal.
Yeah. No joke. What's going on in China? We can't say it. But
what's the word? What's the first and last letter of the word?
I guess
Starts with a G.
Oh,
Yeah, there's a
G.
G, yeah.
We can call them
Genocide.
internment camps.
Oh, okay.
We can call them forceful re-education centers. We can say that women are being held down while men come in and force themselves upon the women. The women are undergoing forced surgeries and other extreme forced sterilization, as well as the forceful. This is tough.
brutal, dude.
Yeah. This is brutal. There's more.
We should do it in the bonus segment and just be explicit.
There's so much more. Joe Biden, when asked about this, he basically said, I'm not going to criticize them because, they got different culture. And
What?
I couldn't believe it.
What?
I could not believe it.
It makes me think of, and I always hate bringing up the Nazis. I feel like they get too much publicity as it is,
Sure.
but the way that the British appeased them and people, like they voted Hitler Time Man of the Year.
Was it Neville Chamberlain?
Neville Chamberlain was like,
Peace in our time?
Yeah, let's give them the Sudetenland, is that what it is? And then they were like, and then if we just give them this land, they won't aggress anymore. And like if you give these totalitarian regimes and give, you're just empowering them.
Biden is suckling the teat of communist
I don't know
China.
what to do, because what's the other option? War? I don't know. Okay.
See, at least they bring up, that they don't want war, and they at least put themselves in a position where, I don't like this rhetoric. Biden is suckling the teat of China. It's just so inflammatory, and it drums people up and gets them angry that they want to do something about it. So right away we get into what Tim Pool says is, the most horrifying atrocities that you could think of ever is occurring, and China's propagating it. We know this to be certain. We absolutely know this to be a fact. Everything that's going on is just deplorable to the point where they don't even want to talk about it. They don't even want to mention exactly what they're talking about. Like, let's take a deep breath here. Everyone is against what Tim Pool described. If that was honestly happening, which we're gonna take a look at that. If that was honestly happening, it would be deplorable. It is something I would universally condemn. However, that does not lead to the U.S. needing to intervene, or even the U.S. needing to, publicly maybe condemn it. Of course, everything goes back to the Nazis and, everyone appeased Hitler, and that's how the Holocaust happened. History is written by the victors. I could go on all day about that, but let's take a look at what we actually know in hindsight to be propaganda that was used to start war in the past. So famously, I'm going to, let's talk about World War I, okay? A very famous lie that was pushed by the British government was to drum up war in World War I against the Germans, was that the Germans were creating glycerin from the dead corpses of their soldiers. Okay, I'm not making this up. Here's a quotation from the Times of London. One of the United States consuls on leaving Germany in February 1917 stated in Switzerland that the Germans were distilling glycerin from the bodies of their dead. This was reported in the Times on April 16, 1917. Here is what is, quote, a first-hand report of these glycerin factories. We pass through Evering Court. There's a dull smell in the air as if lime were being burnt. We are passing the great corpse exploitation establishment of this army group. In German, it's Verwaltungsanstalt of this army group. The fat that is won here is turned into lubricating oils, and everything else is ground down in the bone mill to a powder, which is used for mixing with pig's food as manure. Nothing can be permitted to go to waste. So there was another report in the Times the next day, giving a very long and detailed account of a Deutsche Anfallverwertungsgesellschaft factory near Koblenz, where trainloads of the stripped bodies of German soldiers, wired into bundles, arrive and are simmered down in cauldrons, the products being stearine and refined oil. And forgive any mispronunciations I have. So there was another, so there's all these first-hand observations of Germans distilling down their dead and dead civilians to create glycerin to create explosives with. There was a story told by Sergeant B of the Kents that a prisoner had told him that the Germans boiled down their dead for munitions and pig and poultry food. This fellow told me that Fritz calls his margarine corpse fat because they suspect that's what it comes from. So this isn't the only lie that was peddled by the British to drum up support for war. And this is from Arthur Ponsonby's famous work, Falsehood in Wartime. So another one that was told that came out to be complete bunk. Let's see. There were atrocity propaganda. This atrocity propaganda was basically, a lot of it revolved around when the Germans marched through France, there was propaganda that they cut the hands off of little children, and this was published widely in the British newspapers. There was also false stories about how, let's see here. So the Belgian baby without hands. Not only did the Belgian baby whose hands had been cut off by the Germans travel through the towns and villages of Great Britain, but it went through Western Europe and America, even into the far West. No one paused to ask how long a baby would live were its hands cut off, unless expert surgical aid were at hand to tie up the arteries, the answer being a very few minutes. But everyone wanted to believe the story, and many went so far as to say they had seen the baby themselves. The lie was as universally accepted as the passage of the Russian troops through Britain. He's referring to something earlier written in this book. There's a quote from the Times, again, from their correspondent in Paris. One man whom I did not see told an official of the Catholic Society that he had seen with his own eyes German soldiery chop off the arms of a baby which clung to its mother's skirts. Reported August 27th, 1914. On September 2nd, 1914, the Times correspondent quotes French refugees declaring, quote, "They cut the hands off the little boys so that there shall be no more soldiers for France." Pictures of the baby without hands were very popular on the continent, both in France and in Italy. La Rive Rouge had a picture on September 18th, 1915, and on July 20th, 1916, made it still more lurid by depicting German soldiers eating the hands. Le Journal gave on April 30th, 1915, a photograph of a statue of a child without hands, but the most savage of all, which contained in it no elements of caricature, was issued by the Allies for propaganda purposes and published in Critica in Buenos Aires. Reproduced in the Sphere, January 30th, 1925. The heading of the picture was, "The Bible before all," and under it was written, "Suffer little children to come unto me." The Kaiser is depicted standing behind a huge block with an axe, his hands darkly stained with blood. Round the block are piles of hands. He is beckoning to a woman to bring a number of children who are clinging to her, some having had their hands cut off already. Babies not only had their hands cut off, but were impaled on bayonets, famously the babies on bayonets. and in one case nailed to a door even. But everyone will remember the handless Belgian baby. It was loudly spoken of in buses and other public places, had been seen in a hospital, was now in the next parish, etc., and it was paraded not as an isolated instance of an atrocity, but as a typical instance of a common practice. In Parliament, there was the usual evasion which suggested the story was true, although the only evidence given was, quote, seen by witnesses. Mr. A.K. Lloyd asked the First Lord of the Treasury whether materials are available for identifying and tracing the survivors of those children whose hands were cut off by the Germans, and whose cases are referred to by letter and number in the report of the Bryce Committee, and if so, whether he will consider the possibility of making the information accessible, confidentially or otherwise, to persons involved in the future of these survivors. So basically, there's a conversation I won't recount in detail, but basically they went... They did an investigation and they sent out correspondents to go investigate France and could find no cases of any children without hands at all. So there was nothing to corroborate this. It was all hearsay evidence of these atrocities passed by word of mouth and reprinted greedily by publications. I can only guess is to spur war. So let's go through here. There's another one of a story about the mutilated nurse, and these stories went all over the place in Great Britain, and they all turned out to be false. There was a letter that was written by a sister of an alleged nurse who had had her breasts cut off and was raped and murdered by German soldiers. And here's a fake letter that was written, printed in the Star. Exuberantly printed in the Star, September 16, 1914. A Nurse's Tragedy, the title is. Dumfries' girl is the victim of shocking barbarity. Quote, news has reached Dumfries of the shocking death of a Dumfries young woman, Nurse Grace Hume, who went out to Belgium at the outbreak of war. Nurse Hume was engaged at the camp hospital at Vilford, and she was the victim of horrible cruelty at the hands of German soldiers. Her breasts were cut off, and she died in great agony. Nurse Hume's family received a note written shortly before she died. It was dated September 6 and ran, Dear Kate, this is to say goodbye. Have not long to live. Hospital has been set on fire. Germans cruel. A man here had his head cut off. My right breast has been taken away. Give my love to blank. Goodbye, Grace. Nurse Hume's left breast was cut away after she had written the note. She was a young woman of 23 and was formerly a nurse in Huddersfield Hospital. Nurse Mullard of Inverness delivered the note personally to Nurse Hume's sister at Dumfries. She was also at Vilford, and she states that Nurse Hume acted the part of a heroine. A German attacked a wounded soldier whom Nurse Hume was taken to hospital. The nurse took his gun and shot the German dead. This was reported in the Star, September 16, 1914. So there's a letter. I mean, essentially it just comes out that the letter was faked, and this girl, the sister, there was a retraction. Let's see. A condensed account, So a condensed account appeared in the Evening Standard with the note, quote, this message has been submitted to the Press Bureau, which does not object to the publication and takes no responsibility for the correctness of the statement. Quote, a story which attracted particular attention both because of its peculiar atrocity and because of the circumstantial details which accompanied it, was told in several of the evening papers on Wednesday. It was first published, we believe, in the Dumfries Standard on Wednesday morning and related to an English nurse who was said to have been killed by Germans in Belgium with the most revolting cruelty. This nurse came from Dumfries, and according to the Dumfries Standard, the story was told to the nurse's sister in Dumfries by another nurse from Belgium, who had also gave an account of it in a letter. Further, the Dumfries Standard published a facsimile of a letter said to have been written by the murdered nurse when dying to her sister in Dumfries. The story therefore appeared to be particularly well authenticated, and as we say, it was published by a number of London evening papers of repute, including the Pall Mall, the Westminster Gazette, the Globe, the Star, and the Evening Standard. But late on Wednesday night, it was discovered to be entirely untrue, since the nurse in question was actually in Huddersfield and had never been to Belgium, though she volunteered for the front. The remaining fact is that her sister in Dumfries states, according to the Yorkshire Post, that she was visited by a, quote, Nurse Mullard, professing to be a nurse from Belgium, who told her the story and gave her the letter from her sister in a handwriting that resembled her sister's. So this was reported in the Times, leader September 18th, 1914. The Times goes on to call for an inquiry and to suggest that the story may have been invented by German agents, Russia, anyone, in order to discredit all atrocity stories. Kate Hume, 17, was charged at Dumfries yesterday before Sheriff Substitute Primrose with having uttered a forged letter purporting to have been written by her sister, Nurse Grace Hume, in Huddersfield. She declined to make any statement on the advice of her agent, her attorneys, and was committed to prison to await trial. So that was reported in the Times September 30th, 1914. So, I would suggest everyone go and read Falsehood in Wartime by Arthur Ponsonby. Again, he says amazing quotes, and this is specifically applicable to this drumming up against China that we're hearing over and over again. A useful purpose, let's see, to justify themselves by depicting the enemy as an undiluted criminal, and secondly, to inflame popular passion sufficiently to secure recruits for the continuance of the struggle. This is those who would spread propaganda. They cannot afford to tell the truth. In some cases, it must be admitted that at the moment they do not know what the truth is. The psychological factor in war is just as important as the military factor. The morale of civilians as well as of soldiers must be kept up to the mark. People must never be allowed to become despondent, so victories must be exaggerated and defeats, if not concealed, at any rate minimized, and the stimulus of indignation, horror, and hatred must be assiduously and continuously pumped into the public mind by means of propaganda. Statements about it is well to have it properly stirred by German frightfulness, and a sort of general confirmation of atrocities is given by vague phrases which avoid responsibility for the authenticity of any particular story, as when Mr. Asquith said, this was a statement that was made in the House of Commons, "We shall not forget this horrible record of calculated cruelty and crime." So, he warns, with a warning before them, the common people may be more on their guard when the war cloud next appears on the horizon, and less disposed to accept as truth the rumors, explanations, and pronouncements issued for their consumption. They should realize that a government which has decided on embarking on the hazardous and terrible enterprise of war must at the outset present a one-sided case in justification of its action, and cannot afford to admit in any particular whatever the smallest degree of right or reason on the part of people it has made up its mind to fight. Facts must be distorted, relevant circumstances concealed, and a picture presented which by its crude coloring will persuade the ignorant people that their government is blameless, their cause is righteous, and that the indisputable wickedness of the enemy has been proven beyond question. A moment's reflection would tell any reasonable person that such obvious bias cannot possibly represent the truth. But the moments, reflection is not allowed. Lies are circulated with great rapidity. The unthinking mass accept them, and by their excitement sway the rest. The amount of rubbish and humbug that pass under the name of patriotism in wartime in all countries is sufficient to make decent people blush when they are subsequently disillusioned. At the outset, the solemn asseverations of monarchs and leading statesmen in each nation, I'm sure I mispronounced that, I'm sorry, that they did not want war must be placed on par with the declarations of men who pour paraffin about a house knowing there are continually striking matches and yet assert they do not want a conflagration. I'm sorry, Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski, I respect you immensely. However, I caution you that this is the road we are marking down. You're spreading paraffin around the house, and you're striking matches and saying that you're anti-war. I need to push back on that for my own sake and for all of us anti-war activists. Let's be very careful. This form of self-deception, which involves the deception of others, is fundamentally dishonest. I'm not accusing Luke and Tim of being dishonest. However, I'm warning of this path, putting paraffin, pouring gasoline all over a house and striking matches, saying that you don't want a conflict. So we know that the British propaganda, they worked to start the war. This is, Ponsonby he was a representative in British Parliament. So, I could go on and on. There's no replacement for reading the actual, the actual work, Falsehood in Wartime. I would suggest everyone go read that. I'll put a link in the show notes page to to this edition of it. And, we see this currently. I mean, it's come out that Well, let's do the incubator babies. I mean, there's so many war lies. And, I should... This turned out to be completely untrue. And, of course, it's not the first result here. The Nasiraya girl story.
Our final witness is also using an assumed name. And, again, we ask our friends in the media to respect the need for her to protect her family. And we finally call on Naira to testify.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Naira, and I just came out of Kuwait. My mother and I were in Kuwait on August 2nd for a peaceful summer holiday. My older sister had a baby on July 29th, and we wanted to spend some time in Kuwait with her. I only pray that none of my 10th grade classmates had a summer vacation like I did. I may have wished sometime that I could be an adult, that I could grow up quickly. What I saw happen to the children of Kuwait and to my country has changed my life forever. It has changed the life of all Kuwaitis, young and old. We are children no more. My sister, with my 5-day-old nephew, traveled across the desert to safety. There was no milk available for the baby in Kuwait. They barely escaped when their car was stuck in the desert sand, and help came from Saudi Arabia. I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. The second week after invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew, who, if born premature, might have died that day as well. After I left the hospital, some of my friends and I distributed flyers condemning the Iraqi invasion until we were warned we might be killed if the Iraqis saw us. The Iraqis have destroyed everything in Kuwait. They stripped the supermarkets of food, the pharmacies of medicine, the factories of medical supplies, ransacked their houses, and tortured neighbors and friends.
So, it goes on here. It turns out that she was the daughter of some kind of a politician. Let's see. I want to get a quote for that. And Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski will know full well about this. I'm not accusing them of not knowing anything about this. It was a lie, started out as a rumor which was first picked up and propagated by the American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. Just 9 days after the Iraqi invasion, a front group for the Kuwaiti government, known as the Citizens for Free Kuwait, paid the firm $10.8 million to galvanize U.S. public opinion in favor of intervention. Craig Fuller, a political advisor for President Bush, was manning the Kuwait account from Hill & Knowlton's office in Washington, D.C. The PR campaign consisted of interviews with visiting Kuwaitis, public rallies, and making letters written by Middle East hostages available to the media. Hill & Knowlton also lobbied politicians in the House and Senate. Enter Naira, who was actually the daughter of Kuwaiti ambassador to the U.S. Although there is no record of her working as a nurse, her testimony was convincing, thanks to the coaching she had received from Hill & Knowlton before she testified. So, there you go. There's a blatant one. How about, was the Duma chemical, the Syrian gas story?
It's hard to know exactly what's happening in Syria right now. I'd like to know specifically how that release of chemical gas, if it did occur, and it looks like it did, how that occurred. Because frankly, I don't think Assad would have done that. It does not serve his interests. It would tend to draw us into that civil war even further.
Who do you think is behind it? Who do you think is behind it?
You've got a war going on over there. Supposedly, that airstrike was on an ammo dump, and so I don't know if it was released because there was gas stored in the ammo dump or not. That's plausible. I'm not saying that's what I think happened, but
You're more inclined to believe the position of what Bashar al-Assad is saying and what the Russians are saying right now than more inclined to believe what even your colleagues here in the United States believe is truth, that this is Assad, and what human rights observers over there say is Assad?
I don't think it would have served Assad's purposes to do a chemical attack on his people. So it's hard for me to understand why he would do that if he did.
Congressman Tom Massey, thanks for your time.
One of my favorite clips there, Thomas Massey. Yeah, so I mean, on top of that, we also know it's come out that, FDR had pre-knowledge of Pearl Harbor happening, and in fact, the United States took certain measures to amp up those a confrontation. As we're going now through, there's an article that has come out in the gray zone that's going to be reprinted by antiwar.com. And this is why I caution specifically Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski. The article is entitled, U.S. State Department Accusation of China Genocide Relied on Data Abuse and Baseless Claims by Far-Right Ideologue. This is by Gareth Porter and Max Blumenthal, published yesterday, February 18th, 2021. Gareth Porter, of course, I know Gareth Porter for his work on the Iran nuclear deal and trying to push back against that, the idea that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. So the Trump and Biden administrations have relied on the work of a far-right religious extremist, Adrian Zentz, for their genocide accusation against China. A close review of Zentz's research reveals flagrant data abuse and outright falsehoods. Okay, so we need to be very careful if we're going to be accusing China of genocide here. We know history. We know history. We know all the lies that have been told to drum up war in the past. And let's continue. Both President Biden and his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, have endorsed a former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo's last-minute accusation of Chinese genocide against the Muslim Uyghur population in Xinjiang, sorry, I'm mispronouncing, province. But an investigation of published work by the researcher Pompeo relied on to level his genocide allegation reveals a pattern of data abuse and fraudulent assertions that substantially undermines the incendiary charge. The U.S. government's accusation of genocide against China stems from a single source, a June 2020 paper by Adrian Zentz, a right-wing German researcher affiliated with the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and neoconservative Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C. Articles by the Associated Press, CNN, and BBC also relied on Zentz's paper to claim that plunging Uyghur birth rates and the application of birth control measures in Uyghur counties of the Xinjiang region were proof of a policy of, quote, demographic genocide. Just days after the publication of Zentz's paper, Pompeo issued a statement denouncing China's alleged policy of, quote, forced sterilization, forced abortion, and coercive family planning, personally crediting Adrian Zentz's shocking revelations. Biden backed the genocide charge last August when it first appeared in a flurry of media reports. His campaign spokesman told Politico, quote, the unspeakable oppression that Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities have suffered at the hands of China's authoritarian government is genocide, and Joe Biden stands against it in the strongest terms. Blinken, for his part, declared at his first press conference as Secretary of State that he agreed genocide has been committed against the Uyghurs. While Zentz's employers describe him as one of the most leading scholars on the People's Republic of China government policies towards the country's western regions of Tibet and Xinjiang, he is in fact a far-right Christian fundamentalist who said he is led by God against China's government, deplores homosexuality and gender equality, and is taught exclusively in evangelical theological institutions. Okay, I mean, take that with a grain of salt. I mean, it kind of reeks a little bit of SJW-ism, and just that, it is telling that he says he's led by God against China's government, but that doesn't mean he's not telling the truth about genocide. Let's look at further evidence. Lyle Goldstein, a China specialist and research professor in the Strategic and Operational Research Department of the Naval War College, told the Gray Zone that Zentz's labeling of the Chinese approach to the Uyghurs as demographic genocide is ridiculous to the point of being insulting to those who lost relatives in the Holocaust. Goldstein said the Chinese approach to Xinjiang is a more repressive posture than we would like, but it sure isn't genocide. Moreover, a careful review of Zentz's research shows that his assertion of genocide is contradicted by flagrant data abuse, fraudulent claims, cherry-picking of source material, and propagandistic misrepresentations. Genocide or equal treatment in family planning policy? ? In Adrian Zentz's 2020 paper for the Jamestown Foundation, he boasted that his findings, quote, provide the strongest evidence yet that Beijing's policies in Xinjiang meet one of the genocide criteria cited in the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Zentz was referring to Article 2D of that convention, quote, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. But Article 2 qualifies the relevant acts as those, quote, committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. But preventing births by itself cannot be evidence of alleged genocide without evidence of intent to destroy the group in question. Otherwise, any birth control program provided to an ethnic group would be prima facie evidence of a policy of genocide against the group. Zentz argued that population control measures applied to Uyghurs could be branded as genocidal because population growth rates fell by 84% in the two largest Uyghur prefectures between 2015 and 2018 and declined further in several minority regions in 2019. But more complete statistics that Zentz cited in his report and data that he conveniently omitted contradicted his conclusion. Zentz provided statistics revealing that between 2005 and 2015, Uyghur population growth in Xinjiang was 2.6 times higher than that of Han Chinese in the Xinjiang region. The chart displayed in his report is below. So for those watching the video version, I implore you to be watching on library.com, libertyweekly.net/LBRY. You can see the difference in birth rates, population growth over time. Both official Chinese figures and Zentz agree that the Uyghur population in Xinjiang increased significantly between 2010 and 2018. Zentz figures shows an increase in Uyghur population from 10.1 million to 11.8 million during the 2010 and 2018, while Chinese government figures demonstrate an even larger increase from 10.1 to 12.7 million. That means the Uyghur population in Xinjiang grew by a staggering 25%. Zentz shows the Han Chinese population rising from 8.5 to 9.8 million during that same 8-year period, while Chinese government figures show a smaller increase in Han population from 8.8 million to 9 million. Both the rapid surge in Uyghur population growth rates and the increased margin of the Uyghur majority over the Han population of Xinjiang in recent years are the result of the one-child policy imposed on Han Chinese couples by the Chinese government in 1979. According to China specialist Martin King White, the one-child policy was accompanied by a long-term pattern of abuses in its implementations, including, quote, intrusive menstrual monitoring, coerced sterilizations and abortions, staggering monetary fines for, quote, over-quota births, smashing of furniture and housing of those who resisted, and withholding registration for babies born outside the plan. Uyghur families, however, were exempted from the one-child policy. Urban Uyghur couples were allowed to have 2 children and rural Uyghur couples 3. In practice, moreover, rural Uyghurs often had large families with as many as 9 or 10 children in some cases, as even Zentz acknowledged. In 2015, the Chinese government announced a relaxation of the decades-long one-child limit on urban Han couples, allowing urban couples to have 2 children and rural families to have 3. In Xinjiang, where birth rates routinely exceeded previously established limits, local officials urged the equal application of family planning policy between Han and Uyghur couples. In July 2017, Xinjiang's regional government ended the exemption on the one-child limits for Uyghurs. Uyghur couples were thus expected to follow the same limitations recently imposed on Han couples: 2 children in urban areas and 3 in rural regions. As the Chinese government has freely acknowledged, 5% decrease in the birth rate in Xinjiang between 2017 and 2018 was the result of the equal enforcement of family planning policy across ethnic lines. While eluding this point, Zentz also overlooked the fact that China's overall birth rate has fallen precipitously in recent years across the demographic spectrum as the population ages and contraceptives become more widely available through programs like the government's annual free distribution of 1 billion condoms. For example, in the city of Guangzhou, which is far from Xinjiang, the rate of newborn babies has plunged to its lowest point in a decade. Cherry picking and distorting source material claiming free healthcare is genocide. All free healthcare. Also, in 2017, China's National Health and Family Planning Commission announced a $5.2 billion healthcare investment in Xinjiang, stating its intention to strengthen a brittle health infrastructure in impoverished rural areas of the region. So, there's more evidence here. I'm not going to belabor the point. It's a pretty lengthy article. So, I mean, they kind of attack the position of the author of this study by Adrian Zenz by going after his Christian anti-abortion led by God rhetoric against China, which I don't care about quite as much. However, this evidence of him distorting exactly the causes, the probable causes of this decrease in Uyghur reproduction rates. I think it's very important to look at this with a very a close eye here. So I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes page as well. I would encourage everyone with your abundant time to read this. However, to read this report and really think for yourself and think about all the policies at play and what the U.S., what our interests might be in confronting China. Moreover, I am more concerned about the United States government itself than I am about China. China does not affect me in the same way that my government, in quotations, does not affect me in the same way as my government does. My government forces me to pay taxes. My government is the government that limits my freedom. My government locked people in their houses all throughout this year. My government unemployed endless, millions of people during this. My government allowed riotous mobs to destroy cities and make people live in fear. My government is propagating policies that make people afraid to see their own families and is pushing propaganda that will terrify everyone. My government is behind all these things, and I don't even use the term my government in particularities. It's not, my government. So think about that. Think about it really closely. Really examine it. If it does turn out that China is committing genocide against the Uyghurs, I think that's deplorable. I think that, rhetoric condemning those actions is appropriate, but be very careful. Be very careful. We need to look at this with a very sober eye. We need to avoid rhetoric that could be supercharged public opinion against China to drum up some kind of a war. China is a paper tiger, in my opinion. There's entire cities where that are empty, that have been built, that are empty because of central bank misallocation of resources. We know the Misesian principle, Rothbard's critique on central banking, is that the Austrian theory of the business cycle, that manipulating interest rates leads to false investment in high order capital, and those malinvestments clear out in a boom bust cycle. And China has had so much malinvestment that these ghost cities is just emblematic of that. And we know the folly of empire. So I think that the United States, if anyone, knows the folly of empire firsthand. They will get themselves mired up in war. They will bleed themselves dry. I don't think that it's something that we have to be concerned with. Honestly, a bigger threat is our own government. And all this rhetoric, I could go on and play Tim Pool. I played about 1 minute and 41 seconds, but this is a 16-minute clip I'll put in the show notes page of, let's go to Luke Rudkowski and see exactly what he says, because I think his rhetoric is also dangerous.
Joe Biden say something like that. Well, his words were very important because it was almost as he was excusing the activities. He was talking about China's history. Whenever China wasn't united, they were attacked from the outside, and he talked about how this is the cultural norms. Well, if it's your cultural norm to strip down and have men forced on women, to have forced sterilization camps, internment camps, I'm trying to watch my words here. Unrequested insemination.
Yes,
that's one way that we could say it. If we're going to have something like that excused as a culture, that's absolutely inexcusable, and it's extremely dangerous, not just for the Uyghur Muslims, but for all the other people that are going to be under the Chinese umbrella. And because of the Belt and Road Initiative, because of China's goal to become the #1 hegemonic power, a lot of people are going to be subjugated under China in the near future.
What you just said, Jack. What did you?
I said that Joe Biden neutered American exceptionalism.
No.
Oh.
I'm talking
unrequested insemination?
Women are being held down. So this news broke. A witness came out and said that her job in the camps was to basically pin the women down, while the men came in.
Take their clothes off, and then, yeah, this was reported by the BBC,
Forced
by the way.
themselves upon them.
Yeah.
We also got numerous reports that many of the women who, on their own, of their own volition, became pregnant, had the Chinese government paramilitary forcefully end those pregnancies.
So they're
forcefully sterilize.
They're trying to sterilize the Uyghur population, but force the Han genetic code into other Uyghur women?
Yes.
There's also videos of children being taken away from their parents and then being told to repeat that the Chinese government, the Chinese state, the Chinese country is their mother now. So what's happening right now, especially with some of the drone footage that's been leaked of individuals being hooded and put on trains, is absolutely terrifying, especially when you see the larger response, especially when you see on Twitter an embassy from the Chinese government officially say that it's women's rights that they're promoting, women's equality and women's freedom when they have these forced sterilizations on them. That's the kind of like crazy, insane, woke language that they're trying to use to justify this. And you just saw Joe Biden usher and utter CCP, Chinese Communist Party talking points to the American public like it was normal.
Where did he get the talking points from?
I'll say two things. The first thing is we had China Uncensored on the show.
Yes.
And they said this. The Biden administration has people involved that like what China is doing in terms of their expansion and have praised them. Now, I want to read you what Biden said. They say, here's a quote. I'll read the quote. I point out to him, I'm assuming this is Xi Jinping, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. The U.S. president continued. And so the idea that I am not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China and Taiwan, trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. Xi gets it. Culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow. The norms in China, as shown in a recent BBC News expose, include systemic torture. And, as we mentioned, women being held down and men coming in and forcing themselves in these concentration camps. Following the release of the BBC report, China banned the outlet in its territory.
Wow.
Because it is happening.
Yeah, there's also a new rule in China where bloggers have to get a government-approved license and credential to talk about politics and foreign policy, but you could still talk about entertainment, food, and beverage.
So, to kind of push on that a little bit, Tim Pool says that China banned these reports, and he says that's evidence that this is happening, right? I don't know if that's exactly evidence that this is happening for real, because, if it was a false story, don't you think that China would also want to ban that report if it actually was false? Now, I would like to take a closer look, at this evidence that Luke Rudkowski and Tim Pool are talking about. So in the search, I had that moment I was referring to, History is a Lie, James Perloff and Keith Knight. This is an interview that Keith Knight did with James Perloff discussing his book about Truth is a Lonely Warrior, which is about exposing all of these war lies that were used to push conflict in United States history. So I would push everyone to that. Let's see here. So I'm just looking at videos. Let's see. Oh, Vox. Let's look at this video.
These are satellite images from the deserts of western China. Look closely and you'll see these huge complexes being built. From the sky, they sort of look like factories or even schools. But look even closer. This line is one facility's perimeter wall. And these shadows, they're cast by watchtowers along the wall. This compound isn't a school or a factory. It's an internment camp. Inside these camps, the Chinese government is detaining as many as 1 million Uyghurs, China's mostly Muslim minority. China doesn't want the world to know any of this. But the story of these camps is also the story of how we know about them, and China's efforts to cover them up.
As soon as we began to document the re-education centers, there was Chinese government officials deleting what we were finding.
Uyghurs mainly live here, in the Xinjiang province of northwestern China. That puts them closer to the capitals of Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan than to Beijing. And Uyghurs are also closer culturally to those Turkic groups than they are to the Han Chinese, China's ethnic majority.
The Uyghurs speak a Turkic language. Their culture is different. They have particular styles of music, a whole rich history that is unique to them.
This is Segal Samuel, a reporter at Vox.
I've been reporting on the Uyghur crisis in China for about a year now. China has been concerned for decades about the possibility of Uyghur separatism.
Uyghurs have actually had their own independent nation 2 separate times in the last century. In 1933, they established the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan, here in Kashgar. But it crumbled less than a year later when it was taken over by Chinese forces. Then, in 1944, the Soviet Union backed the creation.
Okay, I'm fast forwarding here because I want to find any
Bloody
evidence
riots
they
broke
have.
out, pitting ethnic Uyghur Muslims against the dominant Han Chinese.
one of the worst riots took place in the provincial capital of Urumqi. About
Any
200
evidence of
people were killed and
actual
hundreds injured during the unrest.
That was sort of an
genocide, these
inflection
things
point.
that they're talking
After that,
about.
the Chinese really started to crack down harder on the Uyghurs.
And by 2013, Xinjiang had become even more important to China.
To memorize and recite Communist Party propaganda every day. They're often forced to criticize their own Islamic beliefs and to criticize the beliefs of their fellow detainees.
We had to sing songs hailing the Communist Party. We had to repeat in Chinese, "Long live Xi Jinping."
There have been reports of death, of torture.
3 guards surrounded me and abused me.
Each time I was electrocuted, my whole body would shake.
So there's this atmosphere of just trying to uproot what you believe in.
At first, China denied the existence of these camps.
他们安居乐业，享受着宪法所规定的宗教信仰自由，所以呢，根本不存在你刚才提到的一些报道当中说的所谓的新疆维族人的问题。
But activists and academics fought back.
A lot of people around the world are scouring the internet for evidence of China's internment camps for Uyghurs.
In terms of the strategies and tools that I've used and others have used to uncover evidence of these camps, it's quite simply a computer and knowledge of Chinese and thinking about what words, especially government websites, would use.
People have unearthed government documents.
And then we had growing visual evidence. We're looking at satellite images. We can actually trace the creation and expansion of the re-education camp. It was a matter of I think luck or chance I uncovered this image, and until then we didn't have that piece of visual evidence that said this is what it is, and this is what the Chinese government is calling it.
Tim isn't alone. There's a whole network of web sleuths around the world using basic internet tools to document what China doesn't want the world to see. And they've gotten China to change their story, at least a little.
China was denying that these re-education centers exist until journalists and academics and others started to really amass a body of evidence that was so convincing that China couldn't just deny it anymore.
China took a different approach and started admitting that these facilities exist, but carefully painted them as training schools for potential criminals or terrorists.
In reality, these centers are boarding schools. Chinese Communist
In the
Party
meantime,
official.
the camps are still there and growing. This camp, one of China's largest, was as big as the nearby city of Dabancheng in 2017. But by 2018, the camp had expanded to twice the size.
From China's perspective, they think it's worth it. And they want to make sure Xinjiang is an area of the country that they have total control over. And if that comes with a high human cost and even a reputational blow on the international stage, China so far seems willing to do that anyway.
Okay, and the reason why I showed this is because I think it is very important. It could very well be possible that there is a genocide going on against the Uyghur population. What my point in this is to say we need to be very careful and systematic about our rhetoric. We need to put very clearly that even if this is occurring, there are ways to fight against it that will not lead to open conflict, because that would be a lot worse for the world than, I hate to say it, but open conflict will lead to a worse result, is what it will do. There are other ways to fight back, and if we have journalists who are working to expose this on the international community to bring recognition to what is happening, then that's very important, and I would support that. But we need to be very careful not to play into the hands of the powers that shouldn't be. Anyone who is advocating an open conflict or inflammatory emotional rhetoric that I caution that I am identifying with Tim Pool and Luke Rudkowski. Be very careful. Be very careful of that, man. So that video I was referring to that I couldn't think of, and of course I was referring to the Gulf of Tonkin event that kicked off the Vietnam War. Also at the beginning of World War I, there was the Lusitania that was sunk. It turns out that was carrying munitions, and it wasn't just a U.S. passenger vessel. So there's all these events. That video I was talking about is History is a Lie, James Perloff and Keith Knight, libertyweekly.net/112-112. So go check that out. I would urge everyone to watch that video for more details. So be on your guard. Be very cautious. I think I've belabored my point enough. So I really appreciate you guys listening to this show. Tell me what you think. All respect to Luke Rudkowski and Tim Pool. I think you're doing great work and you should keep it up, but I think that there needs to be a very sober conversation about this Uyghur Muslim issue. And if there is evidence, then I want you to report it on the show. Let's show everyone exactly what this evidence is. I mean, if it's satellite images, is it circumstantial evidence? Take a sober look at this report in this article by Gareth Porter and Max Blumenthal. Take a close look at this report by Adrian Zenz. If there are videos or, there's some testimony we saw, testimony can be faked. I'm not saying it is faked. I'm saying that's a possibility. We've seen it in the past. If there's videos or footage of crematoriums or mass graves, show that, present that. We can discuss it soberly. If there are videos of these children reciting Communist Party propaganda, show that as well. Let's have a sober discussion about this, but this inflammatory rhetoric is just dangerous. So, I really appreciate you guys listening. A few updates to the show here at the end. I've been doing for Patreon supporters a live, an on-air Skype hangout where I hang out with the Patreon supporters. That's available at the $10 a month level, I believe, on Patreon. So go to libertyweekly.net/support. There's Patreon, subscribe, star with the same bonuses. You can support with cryptocurrency at float.app, and that's also on the support page. You can also watch on library/LBRY. And you can help support my content with LBC, which is the cryptocurrency that it runs off. You should be watching on BitChute or Library anyways. Cut the cord with the YouTube monster. I wouldn't be surprised if they took this video down, honestly. So other than that, I'm planning a live stream tonight. It's February 19th, Friday, February 19th. I'm planning to do it at, not a live stream, sorry, the Skype hangout. February 19th today at 8 p.m. is our planned time. However, Keith Knight will be debating a neocon, and I'm seeing if we can reschedule that. Otherwise, I always post the link, the Skype invite in the Patreon or the subscribe star feed or anything like that. So if you like this work, please consider supporting it. Also, I wanted to give a shout out, if you'll amuse me here. Libertarian Institute is having a fundraiser, and I think it's very important that you all consider making a tax-deductible donation. We're about 50% to our goal of $50,000, so we're almost at $25,000. You can support with cryptocurrency. We have awesome bonuses that you can help support with. You'll get a shout-out on our Twitter page, but you can also get a book signed by Scott Horton, or signed by the author, the respective author. You can also get, let's see, a physical copy of any of the Institute books. I see Scott Horton, only Scott Horton is signing his books. A lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audio for $100. $200 will get you all the above, plus the 2008 Ron Paul copper coin. $500 donation will get you all of the above, plus a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audio. And it's all tax deductible. So consider donating to the Libertarian Institute. We really do appreciate it. I publish my work there. Scott Horton, Pete Quinones, Sheldon Richman, Kyle Anzalone, Keith Knight, and I know I'm forgetting, let's see. I know I'm forgetting Year Zero with Tommy Salmons. So that's another show on the Libertarian Institute. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for anything that you would consider to give. For that, go to libertarianinstitute.org/donate. All right. So anyways, thanks so much for listening, guys. Stay on your guard. I think we can have a sober, respectful conversation about this. Peace.